And we are now recording, Jay, and you're on. Go for it.
All right. Thank you. This is November 6th Sierra Alpha Charlie. Joel, I do need to share my screen, but I'll need your permission to do it.
Let me look at that. Have you tried sharing?
I did, and it says I can't.
Okay, who can share? Okay, okay, now try it.
All right, I should be sharing. I'm getting some thumbs up on the Zoom side, so that's fantastic. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. This is Jay Ballinger, November 6th Sierra Alpha Charlie. And exciting to have so many folks here on Zoom and also on the repeater. There are some slides. There's a visual component to this. I will be as descriptive as possible. If you have a chance to look at the Zoom screen, it's going to help because there are some things I can point out, but I'll be as descriptive as possible so that everybody can follow along. The presentation tonight is about ARES in general, emergency communications in Sacramento County ARES specifically. And I do have a number of items to go through that may not be the most obvious when you're thinking about ARES or you have questions about what ARES is and ARES does. But I'd also like to make sure I cover topics that you all have. So let's start on the repeater side. If there's anybody out there with a burning question that you want to make sure I answer tonight, why don't you come down with your question and I'll make sure I get that answered. Okay, not hearing anybody on the repeater side yet. Don't be shy. I'll have a chance for more questions later on as well. How about here on the Zoom side? What burning questions do you want to make sure I cover tonight?
Okay.
Oh, I heard somebody start, but I didn't hear them finish. Can you try again?
Jay. Thanks, Michael from Carmichael, North Hills Radio Club net manager and fellow board member here. Yeah, no, I think so far it's a good start. I think one of the questions I have is I think when we have the time to discuss is the community service aspect of ARES. I know that the California National Marathon, usually held in December, is often something that your group is involved with. And marathon's back up running. I could be part of that as well, so I'd like to hear part of that as well as the other aspects of ARES. So I'll let you carry on. Thank you very much. Can 6 backjacks.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that. The community service aspect is going to be part of tonight's presentation, so rest assured. Are there any other burning questions? Don't be shy. I want to make sure that I cover the things that are interesting to you. All right. Well, if you think of some things later, then feel free to bring them up. I'll stop a couple of times here and there and ask for questions. But this is the agenda of the things I have prepared to talk about tonight. And this can be as much of a conversation as we can have over Zoom and over the repeater. But here are some of the topics I do want to cover tonight. First off, why are so many things named Sacramento? There's a lot of confusion on what ARES is inside the organization. And so I'm going to cover some of that, why so many things are named Sacramento. Another one, is ARES a radio club? That may be a non-obvious answer. Is ARES a races club? I know there's questions about ARES and races, similarity, differences. Are we a races club? Along with this is what is a disaster service worker? Who are and what are our served agencies? And is ARES only about emergencies? And we're going to cover these topics, and we'll probably go off into a couple of tangents as well. But this is what we're going to start with tonight. So let's start with, why are so many things named Sacramento? And I'm going to do my best to try to let the repeater drop from time to time. So I'm going to do that now before I jump in. This is November 6th, Sierra Alpha Charlie. Okay, so why are so many things named Sacramento? Well, ARES is an ARRL field organization, and ARRL is divided the country into a number of divisions. So what we're going to do is try to build an address. How do we get from ARRL down to Sacramento County? And so we're going to start with the divisions, and many of you might be familiar with this. We are in the Pacific Division. There are 15 different divisions across the country. We're in the Pacific Division, and in this map here, that's going to be in that green area there on the left. All right, and then even more importantly, the division is handy for ARRL to divide us up 15 different ways. Those of us who do any kind of contesting are probably more familiar with the next level, which is our section. And there are 71 different sections across the country for ARRL. And we are in the Sacramento Valley section. So this is where the first part of the confusion comes in, is we've got something else here called Sacramento, the Sacramento Valley section. By the way, there is a director of the Pacific Division. That's Kristen McIntyre, Kilo 6 Whiskey X-Ray. Jim, who was Kilo 6 Juliet Alpha Tango, became a silent key last year, kind of suddenly. And so Kristen has stepped in to take the remainder of that position for that term. So she is our Pacific Division Director. All right, so we have this thing called the Sacramento Valley section. Sometimes our valley identifier is used in contesting, like field day, right? When you give that exchange in field day, you'll say Sierra Victor, and that stands for our Sacramento Valley section. And the Sacramento Valley section does have its own website. And our Sacramento Valley section manager is Carol Malazzo, Kilo Papa 4 Mike Delta. And she's familiar with many of us here in the Sacramento area. And she serves us well as the section manager. And interestingly, the section manager is elected by the members of ARRL. You don't have to be an ARRL member to be a member of ARES. I do as emergency coordinator, but you don't have to be. But to be a section manager, you're elected by the members of ARRL within your section. So Carol is our Sacramento Valley section manager. And so here's a picture of the Sacramento Valley section website. So not only do we have the Sacramento Valley, but now we have website number 1 that has Sacramento in the name of it. All right, now continuing on with this theme, Sacramento Valley ARES, which is not us yet, we're Sacramento County ARES. Sacramento Valley ARES also has its own website. So this is the second website with Sacramento and ARES in the name. Well, second one was Sacramento. First one was Sacramento and ARES that we've presented so far. And so this can also be a little bit of a confusion of understanding what is the relationship with Sacramento Valley ARES versus Sacramento County ARES. And so we're still getting there. We're still building our address of where we're located. We do have an emergency coordinator here for the section, and that's Greg Kukowik, Kilo Golf 6 Sierra Juliet Tango. And he's also very prominent at our events and in many of our nets. And so you probably recognize his name and his call sign and his voice. And the Sacramento Valley section ARES website's important for some of the organization and management and time reporting that we need to do inside of ARES. All right. So we still haven't gotten to Sacramento County yet, but we've gone down from the Pacific Division to the Sacramento Valley section, which has Carol as the section manager, Greg as the section emergency coordinator. So now we want to get down to Sacramento County. So we're getting really close. We are here. And for Sacramento County, there is my position as emergency coordinator. Now that's the same position name as Greg at the section level. So there's not only so many things named Sacramento, but there are multiple people with the title or role of emergency coordinator. And that can also get a little confusing. So I'm the emergency coordinator for Sacramento County, and that's here in the Sacramento Valley section. And if you are looking at Zoom and see it on the map, you notice that Sacramento starts the bottom of our Sacramento Valley section. We go from here in Sacramento County all the way up to Oregon, except for the very left side. Del Norte County is in a different section. And then we go east, directly east through Alpine County over to the Nevada state line, and then all the way up to the corner of Nevada and Oregon. So it's geographically, it's a pretty big area. It's named Sacramento Valley, although there's a lot of mountains, and Sacramento is just right at the very bottom of this section. But if, for those of you looking at Zoom, if you look at the San Francisco section, you see that entire portion of the northwest coast of California. And of course, San Francisco is that little itty bitty gray tip of the San Francisco Peninsula right there. And then all the way north up to Del Norte County. So they also have pretty big geographic area, started with a pretty small geographic area as a name, but I digress. So our address so far is the Pacific Division, the Sacramento Valley section, and Sacramento County, but we can't leave it at that. We got to make it just a little more organized. Inside of Sacramento Valley, as far as ARES is concerned, since that is such a big geographical area, we have divided the Sacramento Valley section into 5 different districts. And Sacramento is in District 3. So in District 3, we have yet another emergency coordinator, and he's here with us tonight. That's Michael, Kilo 6, Zulu Golf Bravo. He is the District 3 emergency coordinator. So our entire address is Pacific Division, Sacramento Valley section, District 3, Sacramento County. And there's 3 of us who have the title of emergency coordinator, and Sacramento appears in that name multiple times. So that's why there are so many things named Sacramento. And it can be a bit confusing when you just say Sacramento ARES. There are some folks who kind of assume that it's the Sacramento Valley ARES organization that they're discussing, when really the most tactical, boots on the ground, hands on the push to talks are really at the county level, like Sacramento County ARES. All right. Hopefully I'll let the repeater drop properly there. Okay. Continuing on. So Sacramento County, I said, was the boots on the ground, the hands on the push to talk. And really we're all those other layers. And I kind of made light of how many emergency coordinators we have and how many organization structures we have. The important part is that they're all here to support us. So for Sacramento County, since we're us and we've got the radio operators who are volunteering their time and skills for ARES, we're supported by the entire ARRL field organization, that is ARES, supported by the Sacramento Valley section, supported by District 3 inside of that, here as resources for Sacramento County. And being organized this way, it gives us a little bit of a communication structure and a support structure and a way to organize amongst and between ourselves, whether it's strictly within the district or across districts or even across sections. At least we all have a network of resources that we can turn to when help is needed or a situation larger than what a single ARES team would be able to handle. All right. So I was going to move on to, is ARES a club? But this might be a good time to just stop for some first questions. So on the repeater side, are there any questions that cropped up either with the name of Sacramento or anything that now is starting to, that you're starting to ponder and want to make sure that I do cover in the rest of tonight? On the repeater side, are there any questions? All right, Joel, I saw the repeater come up, but I don't think I heard anything there. Did I miss anything? Any questions on the repeater side?
No, I think what you heard, someone else had some ambient noise in their room and activated the repeater. You can do a quick try again and then go back to the questions for the Zoom side, just to make sure.
All right, thanks. Yeah, so one more time on the repeater side. Anybody have any questions so far? Okay, not hearing any there. How about here on the Zoom side? Any questions so far? Okay, then we'll keep trucking along. Again, if questions come up, make sure you keep them in mind, and I'll ask again in here just a little bit. Again, this is Jay, November 6th, Sierra Alpha Charlie, and we're talking about Sacramento ARES and emergency communications. So the next topic I wanted to get into is the question of, is ARES a club? And so what is a club? Let's talk about what defines a club. When you look at the different radio clubs or just any other, whether it's officially registered as a nonprofit or not, clubs are going to have certain attributes that define them as a club. And number one is you're going to have bylaws, right? The club has to have a set of rules that it knows how to organize itself by. So you're going to have some bylaws. In addition, those bylaws will define board positions, and there's going to be multiple positions that are defined, right? Usually president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, maybe some directors or some others. The bylaws probably give the president the authority to appoint committees and subcommittees to get things done that can either be on a long-term or a temporary basis, but all of those are governed by your bylaws. And then you have this board that works in accordance with what the bylaws allow you to do. Also, clubs have dues, and dues is a really important contract between your members and a club. The members pay their dues and they are then entitled to the benefits of being a member of the club. And it's, like I said, it's a special relationship between a member and a club. And it's a special little contract, really, that when you pay your dues, you get the benefit of being that member. Also, clubs will have an annual meeting. They should anyway. And the annual meeting is where you have elections of the new board. You have changes you can introduce to your bylaws. Business can get done at these annual meetings, which you can have as many meetings as you want as a club, but you probably have at least one annual meeting that is where the big business of the club is conducted versus the month-to-month business. And so that defines a club. All right, so if that defines a club, not unlike North Hills or many of the other clubs that we have, what defines ARES? Well, ARES is an ARRL field organization. which means it's a program inside of ARES. It's not a separate thing on our own. It's not something that a bunch of ham radio operators get together and then just decide they want to be ARES. No, ARES means something very specific, and it's defined inside of ARRL, and it's their program. They have rules about the program, but it's ARRL's program that recognizes this is what an ARES team is and does. And we don't have a board. We have an emergency coordinator, and that emergency coordinator is appointed by the section manager. Now, here we have a District 3 emergency coordinator, we have a section emergency coordinator, and they may do the vetting, they may do the initial interview, they may recommend or not recommend somebody to be emergency coordinator to the section manager, but ultimately it's the section manager who then appoints the emergency coordinators at all levels within that section. So Greg is appointed, Michael's appointed, I'm appointed. We are appointed by the section manager. Now remember, the section manager is elected by ARRL members from that section. So there is, kind of a closed loop of responsibility there. But once that section manager is elected, then the section manager can then appoint who the emergency coordinators are within that section. All right. Okay, so now we get down to members, and ARES does have members, and there are actually only a very small list of requirements for members. Number one, you must have a valid amateur license. You don't need to be a member of ARRL. You should, as an emergency coordinator, I'm required to, and I'm happy to be a member of ARRL. But to be a member of ARES, you don't have to be a member of ARRL, but you have to have a valid amateur license. And so I know some clubs will let spouses or family members join, even if they're not an amateur radio license holder. But for ARES, each member has to have a valid amateur license. In addition, and it's actually defined this way, members have to have a serious interest in emergency communication. We'll define what that is in just a little bit as well, but this is really it. That's the only list of requirements for someone to be a member of ARES. There is an application process, right? As emergency coordinator, I can manage what that application process looks like. And but there isn't a board, there isn't bylaws, there aren't any dues. And so ARES is structured a bit different than a club is. All right, there is one more important aspect to membership, and this is the one that usually scares people away. You must be trained. I'm going to cover what this training is so that you're not scared, but this goes along with the must have a serious interest. So this isn't just a hobby organization. This is an organization where you have a serious interest in participating. And there's lots of different ways to participate. And it was kind of sort of recently that ARES added that there's a training aspect to being a member of ARES. And there's a really important reason for that. When we are asked by an organization to help them with their emergency communication, they don't want the Keystone Cops there. They want folks who understand how emergency communication works, how the incident command system works, and how do we fit inside of this larger organization when you show up to someplace and there's lots of volunteers running around, particularly with different colored vests on. How do you know where you fit inside of that hierarchy? And so that's why there's this requirement to be trained so that you can hit the ground running when called into action versus having to figure it out on the fly. Okay, what you're seeing on Zoom now are a little bit of excerpt from the ARES manual. And there's a part of the sheet that's qualifications for membership in ARES. And there's a part of the sheet here that talks about level 1 level 2, and level 3. Level 1 is just basic info about ARES, and it's up to each ARES team to decide what kind of training this incorporates. So this can be, it could be as simple as, here's how to use your HT to talk through a repeater. Now, ARES isn't only about VHF repeater work. You know, we can communicate across the bands, but granted, particularly here in Sacramento, I was going to say Sacramento Valley, but I don't want to get that too confused. Here in the Valley around Sacramento County and the other counties, we're really blessed with very good repeater coverage, right? We're in this nice valley. There's some hills on either side that puts the antennas up nice and high. There's some tall buildings downtown Sacramento, even on top of the tall building out there in Davis. So the linking of these repeaters and the availability of the repeaters is certainly a nice gift to the ham radio community here in town. So yes, most of our work is on VHF through the repeaters, but it doesn't have to be. So level 1 is just some basic training about how we operate and how we communicate as a team. All right. And then it goes on to talk about level 2. Level 2 is emergency communication. And this is where it gets a little more official, but don't be scared. There is a class by ARRL called EC001. It's the Introduction to Amateur Radio Emergency Communications. This is available for free on the website. So if you can read a web page, if you can watch an internet video, then you can accomplish these trainings. So there's ARRL EC001, and it's pretty straightforward to go through. There are also some Federal Emergency Management Administration courses that they'd like you to take. And these are starting to become very, very familiar, and you might recognize these course names that appear in a number of places. But there's IS 100, IS 200, there's more, but then we jump to IS 700 and IS 800. And these FEMA courses are also available for free on the internet. If you can just read a web page, if you can watch an internet video, and then you can click answers on a little bit of a test, and the test isn't that hard, then you can accomplish the ARRL courses and the FEMA courses, and you get a nice little certificate after every single course that you complete. All right. And just for identification, this is November 6th, Sierra Alpha Charlie. And what the FEMA courses, the IS 100, 200, 700, and 800, that's the National Incident Management System. That's the Incident Command System. This is where it teaches you how, when you walk into an emergency, and there's a ton of people, you walk into an emergency operations center, let's put it that way. We've got a couple here in Sacramento, right? There's Sacramento County has an EOC, the state has an EOC, different organizations will have their own EOCs, and even outside of government, they will follow the incident command system, which structures who does what. And to help organize you, you'll have a colored vest that represents the part of the organization that you're working for. And it's an efficient way to grow from one person supporting an emergency to thousands of people supporting an emergency, and knowing what role they're playing and who they communicate with and what it is that they need to get accomplished across the working of that particular situation or emergency. Okay, and then there is a level 3, and the level 3 training is if you want to get into leadership. And this isn't for everyone. There's a number of other courses to take. They're a little bit more tedious. They're not quite as fun to read. And you don't have to get to level 3. If you want to be in a leadership position within ARES, like an emergency coordinator, then you do need to get to this level, and you need to complete these courses as well. There's another ARRL course called EC016, which is Emergency Communications for Management. And then the Federal Emergency Management Administration has a series of courses that they call their Professional Development Series. and it's IS 120, 230, 240, 241, 242, 244, and 288. And when you take all those, you get a certificate for each class, and then you get another umbrella certificate that says you passed the professional development series. And this teaches you, how does an emergency operations center, an EOC, how does it work? How do you function inside of one? How to act like a leader during an emergency. How do you make good decisions? How do you surround folks and make a decision as a team? So it's funny, a lot of these courses almost feel like a business course that you could take at a community college, because they're just teaching some basic organizational structure and decision making in some of them. And again, these are all free, and you can take them at your leisure. And I would really recommend that if you haven't looked into it, you should. These are on FEMA's website, and they're easy to find, and they're easy to enroll and take. And then not strictly part of level 3, but there are a couple of other famous FEMA courses that are a lot more involved, and not everybody takes these. This is IS 300 and IS 400. And these are courses that are usually done in person, and they take 2 or 3 days for the course. And so there might be a nominal fee to attend, just because there is going to be a live human instructor, and they probably serve you lunch. And there's a few other expenses that go on with IS 300 and 400. And if you're interested in those, keep your ear out, because a lot of times these will be offered a couple of times a year from the different government teams around here, such as Sacramento County or Cal OES. And if there's room, they'll open them up to folks who would like to register and take them as well. But they're a bit more involved. Like I said, it's a couple 3 days for these. I think it's 2.5 days to get those done. And so not everybody has the chance to accomplish IS 300 or IS 400 yet.
Hey, Jay, I'd like to cut in. And we've passed our 8 o'clock normal start time, so I'd like to see if we've gained any additional members on the net or the meeting. So let's start on the repeater side. Are there any, is there anyone on the repeater that would like to check in? Okay, nothing heard on the repeater side. How about the Zoom side? Would someone like to check into the net? Nothing heard. Let's try one again. Once again, on either side, Zoom or the repeater, would anyone like to do a check-in? Okay, nothing heard. So thank you for the interruption, Jay. You can go ahead and continue.
Okay, well, thanks very much. And for identification, this is November 6th Sierra Alpha Charlie, and we're talking about ARES in general, and Sacramento County ARES specifically, as part of the North Hills Radio Club meeting. So, and appreciate you guys inviting me to do this. So on the Zoom side.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. AI6DG for ID on my side too.
Yeah, excellent.
Thank you for coming.
No problem. Happy to be here. So on the Zoom side, there's this slide is showing that ARES is not a club. We went through the differences of what is a club and what is ARES. We're not a club, but we love clubs. And there's no, from my perspective as EC, there's really not a competition for members. There could be some people who might think there is, or might be confused that ARES is a club, but we're not. We don't have dues, which is which is nice. But with dues as a club, you have assets and resources. You can pay to repair your 220 repeater, for example, right? So as ARES, we don't have dues because we're not a club. There is a way to donate your time and material to Sacramento County ARES, but we have to find a use of assets from other places. And so there's advantage to being a member of a club or multiple clubs, actually. And also you can volunteer your expertise with ARES as well. What I find kind of funny is there's a familiar cast of characters usually at these events. So whether it's usually at some of the fun events that we end up covering, right? You'll see the same people at these events, and sometimes it's not even super clear which organization is hosting the event or which club is it. Is it an ARES thing? Is it some, because the same people show up, right? The same amateur radio operators, all of our friends show up at these things. And so it at some level, it doesn't really matter if you're a member of a club or not a club. We're happy to have folks participate. And then in addition, there is some overlap when it comes to some of the events. And this is where a little bit of territory grabbing can occur from time to time. There are some very neat and unique events that occur around our region. And each organization that holds these events, when they need help with radio or emergency communication, are generally used to approaching the same group that they approached last time. And so sometimes that's one of our radio clubs around town. And I've got a big list of just some of the clubs that are immediately available around here. And that's a pretty big list. And so that organization may reach out to one of these clubs because that's who they reached out to last time. Sometimes they're contact ARES because that's who they contacted last time. And so there can be a little bit of territory grabbing of this event is ours, not yours. And we try to minimize that as much as we can because it's the familiar cast of characters. There's plenty of work to do with these things. And whichever organization is the one who's organizing the amateur radio operators, it's a lot of work to liaison between the event and to get your radio operators, find the stations or the locations they're going to be at, assign the tactical call signs. There's a lot of organization, a lot of management that goes in there. So if you've shown up to some of these events and they put you at a certain location and give you a tactical call sign, that's at the end of a long string of management organization decisions that had to be made to get you there in the first place. All right. So ARES is not a club, but I think all of our members are members of multiple clubs. I know many folks who are members of more than one club, or if they're a member of one club, they participate a lot with the other clubs. And so the cross-pollination there is fantastic. Generally, we all get along really well, which is great. And it's very nice to be in here in Sacramento, where there's plenty of radio clubs and there's plenty of amateurs around who can help you operationally and also help when it does come to an event. All right. So we answered the question, is ARES a club? So let's talk about RACES. Is ARES a RACES club? Well, I already said ARES is not a club, but what is RACES? And so RACES is an acronym. It stands for Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service. And, the name with a service in it like that probably lets you know that this is a government defined kind of a thing. RACES was created after World War II. In World War II, there was a suspension of the amateur radio service, among other things as well. But the president can declare this with some of the war powers discretion that the president has. The president can declare that the amateur radio service is suspended, which means those of us who are ham radio operators would not be allowed to communicate on the amateur bands because we're all following Part 97, and that says if the service is suspended, then we're not able to participate there. So RACES was created after World War II. During World War II, when they had the suspension, they did hastily craft up kind of a 1.0 version of RACES. And It took them about 6 months to get it defined and going, and it was a little confusing. And so the government realized, the next time this happens, why don't we have a program that's already defined so we don't have to figure this out on the fly? And that's where RACES was defined after World War II. So in 1952, there was this new service, Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service was created with some very specific rules. And because this is a government organization, RACES is by and for the government exclusively. ARES is not. ARES is available for any organization to ask us for help. And it could be emergency communication, could just be radio communication. You don't have to be a government agency. We're able to help anyone, really. But RACES is specifically by and for the government. And again, this was created as part of what happened during World War II. Part of these specific rules is you must be pre-registered, right? So I described how they kind of hastily put something together during World War II. When they put RACES together, they said, services like ARES exists and function even when there's not an emergency, right? So you can call us pre-emergency, during emergency, and post-emergency team. That's what ARES, right? We're providing service and support all the time. RACES would be called into action, or you might hear the term activated. RACES would be activated after an emergency has already happened, right? This would be in reaction to an emergency. And if you're reacting to an emergency, the last thing you want to do is try to go out and drum up support and figure out who's going to be part of RACES and who's not. So you have to be pre-registered with RACES so that when and if they're activated, they already know who they can call on. And then this is kind of number one rule of all emergency communication and emergency response is there's no self-activation. And that's true for ARES, right? Just because you're a member of ARES, just because you're registered with RACES, if there is some kind of emergency that occurs, you can't just say, here I am to save the day and go run off in the name of RACES or ARES and go tackle whatever you're going to tackle. No. Rule number one in all of these organizations is you do not self-activate. You are called by the organization to go perform a specific role. That's true in ARES and that's true in RACES. So in RACES, it was important to highlight that there is no self-activation as well. Also, during, I'd say the 1970s, there were some radio clubs that were RACES clubs that kind of used the bully pulpit of RACES to kind of take over events or a lot of airtime or to say they owned a repeater. So about the 70s, the rules were modified to say, RACES also has a limited amount of time that they can train. They can like hold a net and do some training. I think that's only an hour a week. I think they're allowed to have 2 events a year, but no more than 72 hours total between them. So there's a lot of limits to what RACES is. And what RACES is at its core is another service that is separate and distinct from the amateur radio service. So when the amateur radio service is suspended and the government starts using RACES, it's a whole nother set of rules. You are not an amateur radio operator anymore. You are RACES, and there is a specific list of who you communicate with and what kind of traffic you pass. It's very, very rigid and very, very specific. And so having rules like limited training time is just a reflection of how specialized RACES is. And since RACES was formed in 1952, it's never been used. We have not been in the same situation we were in World War II, where the amateur radio service was suspended and the only communication going on some of our favorite bands was under RACES rules. That has not happened. So there are plenty of folks within the government organizations. This would be your city and your county and your state folks and federal folks who are RACES officers, so that the organization is still there. The rules are still being followed, just in case they're needed. But so far, they have not really been used. Okay, so I wanted to compare and contrast and bring up disaster service worker, because similarly, you might have heard this term. What is a disaster service worker? And some of this is going to be familiar. First, it's when your government calls for help. So this is going to be a government run kind of definition, a disaster service worker. And so this could be the federal government, could be the state government. For us, most likely it's going to be the county. And it could be the county who's asking for help for a number of different reasons. And I'll get into some of our served agencies here in just a second. But there's could be a number of reasons that the county is going to need our help. City, county, and state employees may already be, by virtue of being one of those employees, a disaster service worker. You have to sign up. You actually have to take an oath that you're going to defend the Constitution of the United States and the state of California, since I'm a disaster service worker here in California, that you're going to defend both constitutions against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and so on. It's just an attestation that this is kind of a higher calling, higher purpose than just for fun, that you are registering to be a disaster service worker. This is by and for the government. Remember, this is ARES can be helpful to any organization that needs our help. Disaster service workers are specifically within a government construct, city, county, state, and federal. You must be pre-registered, right? This sounds familiar to the RACES side for the same reason that when an emergency occurs and the city and the county or the state needs your help, they need to know who they can call on. They need to know what training you've had. They need to know what capabilities you have. And then they're going to give you some very specific roles that you need to go perform for that government organization. And so there's no self-activation here as well, right? You need to already be registered as a disaster service worker and then wait to be called or pressed into action when and if that time comes. Well, hold on, let me let it drop. Okay.
And also let me make sure that we're still in net mode. Michael, could you please make sure?
Please, stations, Can 6 access controlling.
Set, net, night, on.
Can 6 back.
That was KN6BXX. This is AI6DG, passing back on to Jay, N6SAC.
All right. Thank you. I have to say, so far, working through the repeater has been kind of a nice experience. Thanks for setting this up. This is N6SAC for ID. All right, we're talking about disaster service workers. And one of the reasons to register to be a disaster service worker is that when the government presses you into action, and not every emergency requires you to be a DSW, but when your government calls you under the rules of the DSW, the government agency is assuming some responsibility for you. And that's the biggest protection you get as a disaster service worker, that you're covered to some extent if you're performing within the roles and responsibilities of what they're asking you to do, right? And so that's why even pre-registration is important, so that they know that what can they expect from you. Now, as a member of ARES, I've registered with both the County of Sacramento and with the state of California as a disaster service worker, and they know they can rely on me for emergency communication. That doesn't always mean just 2-meter repeaters. It could mean HF. It could mean telephone. It could mean fax. It could mean email or WinLink, and right, different ways to communicate within the incident command structure, because I've taken that training. So they know that they can say, you're a communication guy. We're going to put you over here and you help communicate, whatever mode of that communication happens to needs to be. And so that's why it's important. And if you're interested in being a disaster service worker, then contact your county. And if it's for emergency communication, then contact your ARES team for that county, and we can help get you plugged in. All right. So I did say we were going to get into served agencies, and then we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to get to some of the community service stuff, because it's not all about emergencies. But since emergency is in the name of ARES, that's where I'm spending most of our time. So what are our served agencies? Here on this slide are the two biggest agencies that we support. There's the Sacramento County Office of Emergency Services. And that's this picture on the left and the picture on the bottom. That's their emergency operations center and their training center. You can see plenty of computers, plenty of phones, big screens, and a bunch of colored vests. Each one of those vest colors means something very specific. So when you walk in, you look at a room like this, you can say, aha, the incident commander is going to be in white, and that team's going to be in white. The operations folks are in red. The finance folks are in green, for example. So you know, just by looking at them, what part of the organization they're in. And then each one of them probably has a little name tag that would describe what role they're playing inside of there. The pictures on the right are from the American Red Cross, and we support the Gold Country region of American Red Cross. And there's a big change that occurred this past year from the pictures that you see there on the right. All right, so what these pictures show are the big, and they use the term congregate, right? Just big room with lots of people and cots and supplies and stuff. That's been the playbook for a long, long time, is to have these congregate centers where everybody comes together. It makes for efficient use of delivering supplies, of delivering volunteers, of communicating, checking in on folks, doing welfare checks, that whole bit. But with the coronavirus this past year, that playbook changed a lot. And what the Red Cross and what the counties and the cities did with the fires this past year is, with the coronavirus, this is the last thing they wanted to do, is to bring a bunch of strangers together in a big room to breathe the same air and possibly infect each other. So the cities, the counties, the Red Cross, they started sending victims of these fires and other disasters into hotel rooms. So the hotel rooms solved the problem of everybody breathing the same air, but it created another problem. One, it's really expensive. Two, it distributes everybody around. So now you have to deliver stuff all over the place. And if you're going to do welfare checks and check in on people, you got to go all over the place. So I think the pendulum, now that the vaccine's coming out and things are starting to look up, this type of reaction might shift back towards this congregate location like this, which is the model that we're all more familiar with. But if you were thinking this past year, we had a major pandemic and these major fires, and how many times did you hear the cry for help for emergency radio operators? It was eerily silent, mostly because emergency operation centers, like the picture you see there of Sacramento counties, they were fairly empty. The state Cal OES, State Operations Communication Center, was staffed with a very small crew. So it wasn't just the congregate locations for victims. It was also these large bullpen work areas for the disaster service workers as well. So we'll have to see what the future holds when it comes to disaster response. I do imagine we'll get back to kind of this model that we're used to. Now, with Sacramento County and the American Red Cross, these are our two biggest served agencies, and they're the ones who can call us for help. Now, sometimes the help isn't for an emergency. And so you don't have to be a disaster service worker. Sometimes there's just an event or something they could use some help with, and that's great. There could be times where they do need to cover the volunteers as disaster service workers, and being pre-registered is what makes that helpful. But not everything requires you to be a disaster service worker. It's just kind of a nice extra piece to be there when they really need you in that capacity. But the county can ask for help. The Red Cross can ask for help for other events that don't require you to be a disaster service worker. Also, also with the county does have its own small team of auxiliary communication service, and it's kind of a magic term in the government world. ACS, Auxiliary Communication Service. Sometimes there's a cutesy name that will go along with it. And Sacramento County has a cutesy name. It's called OARS, OARS. And so there's a small team of volunteers that support the county in their radio communication. And a lot of times it's to do some of the mundane stuff, like break out the box of 800 megahertz radios every month, fire them all up, make sure all the batteries are charged, program in all the right frequencies, and then put them back in the box and wait and see them again next month. So there is some work just in keeping those boxes of radios ready for when the need calls. And so the county, they could use Sacramento County ARES to do that. They have their own small team that can do that. There's many times where the two teams are brought together when something needs to when support is needed. And that occurs quite frequently as well. All right, so with ARRL and with ARES, there are a number of organizations where we have an official memorandum of understanding that already exists between the different organizations. Sacramento County, the American Red Cross, APCO, which is the Association of Public Safety Communications Officials. APCO is easier to say. The Boy Scouts of America, Citizens Corp, which is a Department of Homeland Security program, the Civil Air Patrol, Federal Management Association, Emergency Management Association, NVOAD, which is the National Volunteer Organizations Active in a Disaster. That's their whole name. And they're just a bunch of volunteers that are ready to respond when needed. There's REACT International, which some of you might be familiar with, particularly if you're CB folks. The Salvation Army has their own radio network. There's Skywarn, there's the Society of Broadcast Engineers, the United States Power Squadrons, and the Quarter Centrally Wireless Association. ARES has a memorandum of understanding with each of these already that we can support them if they need us in an emergency. These aren't the only organizations that we support, but these are the ones that kind of have this ready-made MOU already there waiting for us. All right, this is November 6th Sierra Alpha Charlie, and now we're down to the fun stuff. Everything I've talked about so far is on the emergency side and how we're organized. ARES isn't only about emergencies. So there was a question earlier by Michael, Kilo November 6 Bravo X-ray X-ray. And one of our biggest events that we support every year is the California International Marathon. This is a fun one. It's interesting because we interact and interface with a few different organizations at the exact same time, right? There's a big law enforcement present for the International Marathon. There's fire and fire safety and paramedics that are there. There are aid stations that are positioned along the course. And along with those aid stations, we will also place radio operators there. And each year, the agreement will change slightly. Some years we've walked around with 2 HTs, an amateur HT, and the 800 megahertz radios that interfaced with the rest of law enforcement and fire. And those years are kind of fun because when you're on the 800 megahertz, you don't use your amateur call sign. but everybody forgot and used their amateur call sign anyway. And then there's the amateur band that was meant for different kind of traffic. And so yeah, this is why we practice. This is why we have other events to try to be as efficient in this as we can. Of course, the marathon is 26 miles long, so there's lots of volunteers we need. There are some major pinch points. There are relay points. And so this picture here is at the start line. There's a bunch of people. It can be a lot of fun and a lot of interesting, but the marathon is one big event that we support. They didn't have it last year. We're hoping it's going to happen this year. Yeah, let me let it drop. So the marathon is hosted by the Sacramento Runners Association. They're going to have a few small events starting, I think, next month or April, and I hope those go well. So that I think they're learning how to hold smaller events and have people show up in waves versus everybody having this mass start. And I hope things go well because I know the runners miss it, and we like supporting all of the marathons as well. We have supported the Amgen tour of California. I'm not sure the Amgen is coming back to California anytime soon, but we have supported it in the past. I think the entire bicycle race is on hold for a while, but this was another big event that was kind of fun. Just like you see on ESPN, right? You've got these guys and these ladies who are riding fast on their bikes, particularly the speed trials, or if they're coming from a long distance, you can tell they're getting close because the helicopters are following them as well. So it's kind of fun to be involved there and literally be right up next to the rail as they go whizzing by. So here's an event that might be 3 hours of sitting by and then about 30 seconds of intense activity as everybody zooms by, and then it's over. But we were there to make sure the course was clear and people didn't accidentally wander onto the course and get run over by all those bikes. Some of the other fun events. Here's some pictures from the Epi's Great Race. I think it's a different name now, right? The Great American something or other. So community events like that. There's Foxy Falls Century Ride, which is a long bicycle ride. Actually, there's multiple loops, but it can be up to 100 miles, right? Where the Century name comes from. And we'll be positioned, because it's a big course, we'll be positioned all over to help with communication on that. And then I mentioned some training, and it's not always just FM, VHF repeaters. We are also training our folks on how to use WinLink and WinLink Express, and not just using the telnet, but actually communicating over a radio interface. And then also FL Digi and FL Message and FL Wrap, so that we can have more live chat style communication going on with the FL Digi stuff versus more the email style communication with WinLink. And this is part of that level 1 training, because this is what our organizations want us to use. They want us to be proficient in passing electronic digital messages, because when you have a big list of supplies that need to be communicated from one spot to another, typing it in and not misspelling it is way easier than trying to phonetically spell some of these things over the airwaves. And then if you're interested more about Sacramento County ARES, here is our website. This is sacramentoares.org. You can also find us under the old URL of saccounty.ares.org. Both of them will work. And we have training information on here, and there are plenty of volunteer positions. Because we don't have a board and we don't have dues and we don't have elections, doesn't mean there's not a lot of work to do. And so there are plenty of volunteer positions there that we need help with. Everything you can think of that runs as a club, we still have those functions, even if they have slightly different titles and they don't have a formal definition in a bylaw. They do have definitions here on our website. And so we rely on the volunteers who are members of ARES to help fill each one of these roles so that we can make sure that we're ready and can answer the call when the call comes in. Okay. All right. This is November 6th, Sierra Alpha Charlie. And I think I've gone about an hour. And let's see if there's any questions you all have. Why don't we, Joel, why don't we start on the repeater side? You want to see if there are any other check-ins or any other questions on the repeater side? This is N6 SAC.
That sounds good. Okay. Is there anyone on the repeater that would like to do a late check-in?
I've already checked in, but I do have a query. This is N6 NFF.
We'll go to presentation questions right after I check for check-ins, so I'll get back to you. Is there anyone on the Zoom side that would like to do a late check-in? Nothing heard. So Jay, could you go ahead and help Doug with his question?
Yeah. Good evening, Doug, N6 NFF. This is N6 SAC. And go ahead with your question.
Well, good evening, Jay, and everybody on the net. This is Doug, N6 NFF. Jay, my question would be, maybe you'd like to tell some people about the net that takes place on Monday nights on here and the N6 ICW. This is N6 NFF.
Oh, very good, Doug. Thank you very much for the reminder. Also, Doug is a member of one of our other kind of sister groups, Skywarn. And the Skywarn training is actually part of the ARRL ARES training regimen as well. So I've got a Skywarn how to be a Sky Spotter certificate as well, which I think is the introductory course for the Skywarn stuff, but it's also part of the ARES curriculum. Yeah, so Doug is reminding me that Sacramento County ARES, we have our net on Monday nights at 7:30, and it's on this repeater, which is also linked to the N6 ICW repeater during the net. And I think it's a pretty good net. We get between the two repeaters, there's great coverage throughout the valley, and we get a fair number of folks checking in. Particularly lots of visitors, which is fantastic. And I'm glad they're able to check in. And there's many visitors who are kind of regular guest visitors as well. So if you're interested in how many different teams we interface with, listen to the net and you'll hear a roll call of all of our reserve stations, but the different emergency communication teams and other ARES teams that we kind of have a liaison with on their nets and our net. And it's quite a big list. So yeah, thank you for the reminder, Doug. That's Monday nights at 7:30 right here on K6IS and N6 ICW.
Jay, you're saying 7:30 at 7 o'clock, right?
That's what I said. I don't know what you heard. Yeah, it's 7 o'clock. This one was at 7:30. It's at 7 o'clock from 7 to about 7:30. And then N6 ICW has Newsline that goes on at 7:30. So we try to end on time to make sure that that can occur. But thank you, Michael. 7 o'clock, Mondays, every Monday on N6 ICW and K6IS.
Okay, and to state the frequencies that we just referenced, ICW is 147.195 with a tone of 123.0. And this repeater, K6IS, is 145.190, and I got, geez, too much info. 145.190.
Negative
Yeah,
offset 162.2.
Thank you. I was frantically on a computer screen trying to look it all up. Back to Jay. AI6DG.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Doug, and thank you for the correction, Michael. Are there any other questions, or what are some of your impressions of ARES? Did anybody learn anything new after this?
N6BXX.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael. Go ahead, Michael.
Good impression. presentation there, Mike. Jay. Kansas SAC and the rest here. Yeah, no, you did a very good presentation. I have a better understanding of the organizational structure. I'm glad you I'll have to say Sacramento County ARES for the net. So thank you very much for the clarification for sure. And then all things you talk about, the things that folks like me might be able to do. I can see myself possibly a level 1 volunteer in the future. So I'll have to keep that in mind. And again, a lot of information to consider. So again, great presentation. Appreciate it very much. And once again, Jay and the rest that involved with ARES, we thank you for your fine service to our community and to amateur radio. Can't expect back to you.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Michael. I know the majority of that presentation was about the emergency stuff. Really, 90% of what we do are the fun community event stuff and the internal training that we do with WinLink and with FL Digi, building antennas, right? Things that would sound familiar if you were in a club. And the training that we get from the emergency side helps us be better radio operators, even in non-emergencies, right? One of the things we have is some net control training, for example. I've got a couple of videos on the website that you can go and listen to, and it would teach you how to be a net control for Sacramento County ARES. But the secret is those are good net control operation for any net, right? If something's going on and you're the first one on the repeater or on frequency, you're net control until you get more information, somebody else comes along. So having some of those skills from the emergency world helps you in the non-emergency world just be more confident and ready to handle that push to talk and to handle a round table or a directed net or just passing traffic, whether it's an emergency or not.
I have a question. KA6YLA.
Hey, good evening, Kayla. Yeah, go ahead with your question.
Well, we talk about being sent out here and there, and I was wondering whether the duties of ARES or RACES is limited to radio communications, or if you're in a place where there's a flood, can you help out with flood stuff? In other words, is it limited totally to radio participation, or are you hands on other things?
Oh, that's a good question. So if you're going to be pressed into action doing physical labor, let's say, then chances are you have pre-registered with the emergency organization ahead of time. So maybe it's with that county that you are registered as a disaster service worker. When you did that, part of your registration is to have a profile of what are your capabilities. And while you could just on your own go contact your county and say, I'm ready to be a disaster service worker and can help shovel sand into sandbags in a flood. As you're working through ARES and we're working with the county, let's say, your profile is going to more look like your emergency communication, right? There are times where a county will just put a call out for help with general volunteers. It could be people directing traffic. It could be filling sandbags. It could be a number of other things. But generally, when the county contacts ARES, it's going to be for emergency communication, which probably means VHF FM repeaters, but it doesn't have to be repeaters. It could be HF. It could be 800 megahertz on the public safety frequencies. It could be the state works with the counties on a number of other radio interconnect programs that operate on different frequencies than the ham frequencies. And when you're working for them, you can communicate on those. And so it could be cell phones, it could be email, it could be fax machines, it could be any other thing that you would have with emergency communication. So generally, when we're called into action, it's because they need emergency communicators.
Great, thank you very much.
Are there any other questions, either from the repeater or the Zoom side? This is in 6SAC.
Yeah, hey Jay, this is Guy, W6GUI. What I'm wondering is just how deep you guys get involved with stuff. Is there anybody from Homeland Security at some level that's coordinating with one of your directors or your emergency managers at some level to give you heads up about what's likely to be coming down the road, what to expect, what could happen, what the likely scenarios are? Like, for instance, from the state, for instance, the big earthquake. I'm sure you guys are, somebody better be training to, when they have the big earthquake, because it's going to impact an enormous geographic region. And it could also really destroy infrastructure, at which point you guys better have a plan. Is there anybody that coordinates with you on a bigger level? I mean, I'm an old man, but there's going to be a war with China someday. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I'm the kind of guy that was studying the pandemic 6 years ago. I really was. And I was a biology major and when I was in college. So, I mean, there's people out there that really look forward to things, Could be a problem that we're going to have with North Korea. It could be a problem with another pandemic. Is there anybody at any level that coordinates with actual government agencies to really look at the possibilities that could be coming down the road? Doesn't mean you have to make it public, but do any of you guys get that kind of feedback or information? There should be somebody talking about it.
That's a good question, Guy. Well, let's put it this way. Within the government structure, within the National Incident Management Structure, and within the Incident Command System, the ICS is really meant to be a reaction to an emergency or an event. So are there folks out there planning what our reaction would be if something serious happened? Yes, there are. Do they call us and let us know or send us emails? Not generally. When something big happens, there are multiple cogs of the machine that are put into motion. What we do as emergency coordinators, specifically through ARES, is one cog of one piece of that large machinery. And so there's a role for us to play. It's very specific. We play that role and we do it the best that we can, knowing that we are supporting others who are in their roles. We are not generalists. We're not just, we all have a red S and a cape and we can go out and do anything. That's not how the incident command system works. We all have a role to play. We all have a part in that machine to perform. And so we perform that part of the machine, knowing that there are other folks performing the other parts of the machine. So the big answer is yes, there are people out there who are doing this. Do they communicate with us on a regular basis so that we all get an ulcer worrying about all of it? No, we're more making sure that we're ready and prepared and trained so that when some event comes along and they need our help for emergency communication, then we're ready to help them in that emergency communication. They may come up with the traffic. We just know how to pass it around efficiently, right? So that's the part of that puzzle that we play mostly.
Okay. Well, we know that, the big earthquake is likely to be, just an enormous thing that could happen in Northern California, just like the big fires were. And somebody somewhere should be putting those scenarios together for what you guys can do. You know what I mean? And keeping it in mind and keeping you guys updated on what's likely coming down the road. I mean, they knew about this pandemic 5 or 6 years ago.
Oh,
they really did.
Yeah, I see what you mean. So yes, why do we have a net every Monday at 7 p.m., right, Michael? Why do we even do nets? It's for practice. It's so that others can be net control, so that people can check in, we can pass traffic. We know how to handle a group of 40 or 50 radio operators on the same frequency at the same time. We do drills. We will do simplex drills. So instead of being on the repeater, how can we communicate with just simplex on VHF? How do we communicate simplex HF? Does 10 meters work better, or does 40 meters or 80 meter NVIS work better for communicating here in town? We'll do resource nets where we'll pretend that there is a disaster, and we'll say, check in on this frequency, get your assignment. And that assignment might be to distribute you out physically, get in your car, go drive somewhere, and then check in physically at another location. So we do drills, we do practices, we do at least a weekly net so that we practicing these, right? It's not, it's easy to get into the habit of just having a check-in net or a rag chew net, but in the end, those nets are actually very important to make sure that your equipment is ready, that the repeaters are working, or that your equipment is ready and you know how to communicate simplex if the repeaters aren't working.
Jay, may I throw a little in? This
Yeah,
guy.
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Michael.
Guy, one of the other hats I wear is I work with amateur radio communication during emergencies for the American Red Cross. The Red Cross in our hierarchy structures, we do have people who go to Jay and ask them to get prepared. We tell them what we're going to need. So at some non-governmental agencies, they do involve actively the ARES groups. Most of the larger county and states at this time do not include Sacramento ARES directly. They use liaisons between their actual command posts. The state has one, which Jay's a part of. Sacramento County has one. And that's how Sacramento ARES gets their information and what is needed from us. I don't know if that helps explain a little bit better.
No, I mean, I understand to a degree. I know that a lot of the people that I talk to that, are involved in ARES, they want relevance. They want to feel like they're doing something important and that it really is going to matter when the SH, hits the fan, so to speak. And they want to know that they're part of that. And, to be able to do that, you have got to have good communications ahead of time. You've got to have good, understanding of what could be happening. And there's got to be some people at some level that is drilled in, with what potentially could be happening. So I'm just wondering if there is that group that we may not even know about that does know, maybe they get it from Homeland Security, maybe they get it from somebody else, but there should be coordination on some high level when something does happen. And it's likely to happen in some of your lifetimes, not likely in mine, but people that follow this kind of stuff, people that are studying this kind of stuff, it's going to happen. And this kind of a group, this kind of a group is going to be absolutely necessary when the communication structure falls down, when things quit working. I worked for Google and Nest, and I've seen communications lapses, and I've seen how one server over in China can drop hundreds and hundreds of people's, devices, and things like that can really happen. And you need to be able to back up cell phones. You need to be able to back up, other things. I'm just wondering if anybody's taking it really serious. This could be a very important group. Not just for there's a wreck on Highway 50. This could be something that could really matter in the not too near future. Okay.
When you look around town,
Can we let the repeater drop?
yeah, sure.
Alpha India 6 Delta Golf. So I get the feeling, Jay, that you're talking about the ARES being kind of the foot soldiers that's going to go out and do the battle, and the generals, I think, Guy, are who's doing the planning you're talking about, and they're just above in their hierarchy, and they may or may not communicate down to the foot soldier.
Well, there are, this is N6SAC. When you look around town, there are different cogs of this machine. There is ARES, there's Sacramento County ARES. If you go to Southern California, for example, earlier I was talking about there are some clubs that feel that this particular event belongs to them. I talked about Sacramento County having their own little radio communication team that will do some of the logistic stuff before they call us for some help. Different counties in different parts of this state and different counties in other states, their areas are involved at different levels of that. In some cases, they've been able to consolidate all of the emergency response into an areas team. Other counties decide to break it apart. And it's not about how important you are. It's more of what Joel was just trying to describe, where when you look around town, there are a number of regular citizen groups that you can join to be ready if something happens.
Can you continue with that discussion and contrast how things work here with how things work elsewhere? Because it's not always the same, is it? If you suddenly leave California and go to New Hampshire or Texas, is it going to be the same or not?
So the structure of areas will be the same, but what they focus on and what they do might be different. So, Doug's, I mentioned earlier, is a member of Skywarn. You can imagine the Skywarn folks in Kansas probably have more work to do than the Skywarn folks in Sacramento County. The ARES response in the Gulf states or on the Panhandle of Florida or the Carolinas, they have a lot more to worry about during hurricane season than Sacramento County does. So it depends. It's really right sizing, right? It's where you live and the folks that are near you. What is it that you need to focus on to help support the needs of what's going on around you? Is the big earthquake going to come? Yeah, someday, right? Even Yellowstone will blow up one of these years, decades, millennia. Our biggest concern here, of course, is floods and fires, and being able to support the organizations as best we can in their efforts is what we're focused on. Cal Fire and Cal OES and the mutual aid agreements that we have throughout the state and our neighboring states, they do a great job. They are prepared, right? And it's great that they don't have to call ARES or other groups every single time that there's an event that occurs, because they do have a lot of internal capacity to be able to manage those even within their own team. So we're here as auxiliary communication service to support them when they put out a wider call for more help.
No, I understand. I do understand, but I also know that, every single sheriff, every single police chief, they're getting a report every single day from somebody from Washington, somebody from Sacramento, somebody that's giving them heads up about what to expect, what could happen, when it might happen. And I just wondered if at any level within your organization, one of your people is getting that same information. Because if they're not, they should be.
Well, maybe, right? So I know that there are folks that we interface with who are getting that information, and then they're involving us. And this is what Michael was trying to describe earlier. They involve us when it is at least 2 levels away from us being involved yet. And so do we need to be in daily communication with those folks? No. If you're interested, there are certainly places to go where you can get those updates every day, right? But as an ARES team, do we need to get those kind of briefings every single day? No, not really. We need to have the briefings on when we are a couple of steps away from them possibly needing our help. And that's when the communication starts to really kick up on our side.
Charles, WD6 CFS.
Yeah, this is W6GUI again. I've listened in on a bunch of different ARES meetings all over the place, and not one of them do they go over what the potential threats that are capable of happening, that week are, and some of it is just, there's a fire burden possibility, or the possibility is high that, something else is going to happen, or a flood, or, I'd like to hear that during some of these meetings, but I'll be done.
We could look at passing some of that kind of traffic. Here in Sacramento, we're also blessed with, this is the headquarters of Cal OES. And the state operation center there, they're a 24-hour operation. And there is a California Warning Center communication that you can call into and let them know that something is going on, right? So there's a lot of communication channels that will go into the state operation and communication center. And then they will work on sending that information out to the relevant organizations that they need to. For example, lots of communication with the power companies, lots of communication with the cell phone companies, lots of communication with the internet companies, so that everybody is ready or knows the capability if there's a major event going on or if there's capacity that's going to be needed. So there are people who are doing this every day. It doesn't quite reach the level of, do we need to worry about it every day? We're generally in a pretty good spot and in a pretty good state of not having to worry about things every single day. But there are plenty of people right here in town who are doing exactly what you're describing.
Well, if you don't ask for it, if you don't get there and insist upon being in the clue, you won't be. You'll become irrelevant, and you'll be like a little, a ham radio club, not a force to be reckoned with when something does happen. That's what I'm concerned about. But I haven't been in the hobby very long. I'm just showing observations from what I've seen. Okay, so you guys have a good day, and I'll back off.
All right. Well, thank you, Guy. Those are good points. WG6CFS, I think you wanted in here. Go ahead. This is in 6SAC.
Just real quickly, that we work for the served agency, and we may be passing traffic. We don't have no idea what it means. That's not our function to, the served agencies. They worry about the big picture, not us. We're communicators. Period.
Somebody in the organization should know what's going on.
So when you look around, if as a citizen of the county of Sacramento or whatever county you happen to be in, there are a number of ways that you can be plugged in as deep as you want to be. ARES is one way to do it. There is the Citizen Emergency Response Team, right? The CERT training that goes on, that's probably managed by your county's or your local agency's fire department. That's another way to get plugged in. Registering as a disaster service worker with your county is another way. Volunteering at your county's emergency operations center is another way. Volunteering at California OES Emergency Operations Center is another way. There are plenty of ways that you can dive deep into this if you like. And I would encourage you. You would be surprised, well, maybe not surprised, but when help is needed, there is literally an army. Joel called us foot soldiers earlier. There is literally an army of volunteers available out in the community who are highly trained, right? Just because we're volunteers, it just means we're highly trained people who aren't being paid. It doesn't mean that we're irrelevant. It means we have licensing, we pass tests, right? We have operational knowledge of how to work these things. We are highly skilled, highly trained workers that are just not being paid. And every level of the government, from your town up to the federal government, relies on volunteers just like us to offer our skills and expertise and equipment, right? So we're using our own HTs and our own transceivers to do this stuff. Clubs are offering up their repeaters to do this stuff. There is an army that can be marshaled very, very quickly. And that's a big role of a lot of organizations like ARES, to practice and be ready when that call comes.
Okay, thank you for your information.
I really do appreciate all the good conversation. This is great. I don't have anything else to do tonight. I could be here all night. Anybody else have any questions that we'd like to jump into, either on the repeater side or on Zoom?
Yeah, I have you mentioned that to be deployed, when you're told to, you know, that you, I mean, I'm wondering where the transceivers come from. Where do the, and you mentioned that people are using their own HTs, but I think if you're communicating HF, that doesn't the agency provide that?
Yeah, good, a good question. Boy, it really depends on, um, the circumstances. Probably the most common would be, let's say American Red Cross needs our help. And it could be because they are being primarily responsible for helping victims, or they've been asked by other counties to help. Uh, but the call could come out to Sacramento County ARES to help American Red Cross in Siskiyou County, right? So it doesn't even have to be local. It could be there is a shelter at some remote part of some remote county that may already have, let's say, a WinLink station up and running, but they need somebody to help man that thing 24 hours a day. Part of all of those training courses that I listed earlier do describe you should limit how long a volunteer is stuck on the job, because even though they're volunteering, it can be stress and there needs to be breaks. And so imagine manning just a WinLink station 24 hours a day for a week or 2 weeks. You need a number of volunteers to do that. So that would be a good example of there's probably equipment already there. But now they're going to ask you to go and stay in that shelter with those folks for a couple, 3 days, or maybe a week, and take several shifts of manning that WinLink station. That's just one example. So yes, there could be equipment that's already there. In other cases, you may help set up that equipment, or you may bring equipment, or you may start a shelter with your equipment until other equipment arrives, right? That's kind of the whole package there. There could be times where maybe you're helping to find a missing person. So then you're going to use your mobile or your HT rig, right? So yes, there are assets that could be in place. There could be assets of your own that you use in the meantime.
Okay, Michael, I think KN6BXX, I think, had a question. Go ahead, Michael.
More of a comment regarding the guy's concern earlier about our relevance in the volunteer services. I think for folks like myself, I don't have the time right now. Maybe I don't have quite the talent to be like what Jay or Michael Joseph is with ECs. But I think as far as information goes, I think us at the ground level as foot soldiers, I think to me it's a need-to-know basis. But folks like Jay and Mike and the rest of the folks who are higher up on the EC level, and when they need information that's relevant, they need to know, and that's where we can get involved. But I think we could reassure a guy that when the time comes, that we can't, and those of us that would become trained volunteers for ARES or whatever, that we can play an important part. So, like I said, Jay, you got the leadership, you got the skills, or perhaps I don't, but I could still perhaps have opportunities, or a guy would have opportunities to help serve somehow in the community service amateur radio. So again, just a reassurance, we all have important parts. We have different time, different talents, and we can all work together for the good of the amateur radio service or the community in general. Thanks again. Back to you, KN6BXX.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. This is N6SAC. There isn't one single organization from a volunteer perspective that will scratch every itch that a volunteer has. If you want to dive deep, there are places where you can dive deep. If you don't want to dive deep, there are places where you can just stay in the shallow end. ARES kind of borders between the two. Like I said, we're prepared for the emergency, but 90% of what we do are all the fun things, which is, sit underneath one of our pop-ups with an HT and an iced tea and make sure that the bicycles and the runners are going in the right direction. All right. That's great. Now, all that emergency training helps us be better communicators so that we can enjoy the event that we're at. It's not so much on the need to know, really. It's more of, there is such a thing as emergency fatigue, right? If there's some folks who like knowing everything that's going on. And I would encourage you to go find ways to volunteer and be involved in organizations that will scratch that itch for you. Great, go. There are folks who just want to interact with other ham radio operators and learn something every once in a while. Great, that's fine. Yeah, like I said, ARES is in the middle of those. And so we're happy to serve the role that we have. Sacramento County in this area operates the same but different. All right, the needs of what's expected of us are different than Southern California, that are different than the East Coast, that are different than the Midwest, that are different than Seattle and Portland. They're having to deal with all the snow, right? Those Texas guys, they're having to deal with snow, and so there could be more that their ARES team has to do this week than they probably are ready for because of that weather.
We're starting to run out of time. So we'd like to start shutting this down. Let's take one more question. Does anyone have a final question for Jay?
Actually, it's a big comment, Can 6BXX.
Go ahead, Michael.
The comment is in 2 words. Thank you, Jay. Again, thank you very much for taking the time and your great talent and skills, and all the more reason for me to consider at least a level 1 in the near future. Thank you very much again. Can 6BXX.
Well, yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate being able to present this to you all because I tried to pick aspects that you couldn't just do a quick Google and find out about ARES, right? You can Google and understand the history of ARES. I wanted to give you more of that 360 view of what's involved. And if at a minimum, you learned a little bit more about what ARES is and does, great. If you'd like to become a member of Sacramento County ARES or the county that you live in, great, fantastic, get in touch and we'd all be happy to have you. But I thank you for the opportunity to kind of share all this info with you. And I hope you learned at least something new from tonight.
Well, thank you, Jay, for coming and for the presentation. This is recorded. We will get it online somewhere. I hope to get a North Hills YouTube channel where we're starting to collect videos, and I'd like to have a place to put them where people could go to view past content. So I'd like to thank you and everyone that participated in tonight's discussion, and thank the regular K6IS users for standing by for our net. All stations, please stand by while Michael, KN6BXX, takes the repeater out of net mode.
Thank you once again, Joel, AI6DG, NHRC Club President, for helping with this meeting tonight. Thank you once again, Jay, and N6SAC, Sac County Emergency Coordinator, for presenting a great presentation today. And thank you all folks joining us on our meeting on the radio and on Zoom. Thank you very much for tonight's meeting. Hope to see you again soon. Okay, at this time, we'll place all stations, please stand by. KN6BXX controlling.